Welcome to Demand and Disrupt, the Disability Podcast. Here, we will learn to advocate for ourselves and each other. This podcast is supported with funds from the Advocato Press, based in Louisville, Kentucky. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kimberly Parsley, and I am joined today by Carissa Johnson. You all have heard her before. She's been on the podcast as an interviewee and an interviewer, and that's what she's doing today. She conducted our interview today. So, Carissa, tell me who we're going to be hearing from.
We are going to listen to Mark Johnson. He is not one of the original 19 of ADAPT, but he joined the organization not long after they started. So he is kind of one of the OGs a little bit, and he's been involved in disability advocacy since the 1970s. You'll hear a lot about what he did with transportation and the sit-in Atlanta that happened right before the ADA was signed, and just so many different things. We had a plethora of information. So I was super excited and lucky that I got to ask him to do this.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. And so tell me, you mentioned ADAPT, and we have talked about ADAPT before. So tell us again what ADAPT is.
ADAPT is a disability activist organization. It started as a movement to help individuals fight transportation issues on buses. And Mark will talk about some of that. Once that issue was sort of resolved through the ADA and the civil rights, they have now moved on to home and community-based care and wanting that to be a civil right for folks. So they do things like demonstrations and sit-ins and activism for individuals with disabilities. And they actually do have an online museum. They started in the 70s, so you can see, articles and different things that they've done. I would encourage people to check it out, and I'm sure we can link it in the show notes.
Absolutely. That's exciting. And now we have a chapter of ADAPT here in Kentucky. Keith Hosey, who joins you in the interview, he started the Kentucky chapter of ADAPT, and I believe they've been doing some stuff, right?
They have done one demonstration, I believe, and they hope to do more. They got individuals from the national organization to come down and do the training. And as part of the training, I think it was this past year, they actually do a demonstration. So it's more than just, sitting in a classroom and here's ADAPT and here's what they do. No, they throw you in the deep end, and you are doing a demonstration right then. So Kentucky does have a chapter now, which I'm really excited about.
That is awesome.
Mark talked about, I hate to steal his thunder, but I fangirled during this episode. He talked about, how there, until there's an emotional link, there's not any room for intellectual change. And that's what ADAPT tries to appeal to. It tries to appeal to the emotions of folks. And, and it's not like they started not doing the traditional channels of talking to city representatives and state representatives and trying to make the changes that way. They did those things. Sometimes we've seen in our history, it takes more than that. And that's what ADAPT does.
That's awesome. And you met Mark how? How did you meet him?
I really fell into my meeting with Mark. I got a call from Patricia Puckett. She used to work at a disability independent living center in Florida, and she actually retired in Murray. So she and I became friends once she moved here. She's donated some stuff to us. We talked on different things, but she says, "Hey, I have this friend, and they're bringing this caravan to Murray, and actually, they're spending the night with me." She said, "This caravan's all about disability justice and history. Would you like to have an event at your office?" And I said, heck yeah, of course. I would love to have an event in my office. So turns out what I didn't know is this caravan was scheduled to go all across the country, different places, different organizations, different independent living center. They went to almost every state, and their hope was to bring light to what they're currently advocating for, the LaTanya Reeves Act, and to talk to individuals with disabilities and hear their struggles. And just, they had a video that they showed on some disability history and also on the Tanya Reeves Act. And they stopped in Murray, believe it or not. So
That's awesome.
I didn't know I was talking to, and I use air quotes, the Mark Johnson until Keith told me. He said, "You know who this is, right?" And I'm like, "No, Mark Johnson is just a ordinary name. You hear it every day. Anybody can be named that." And I Googled him and my jaw dropped to the floor. And now Mark's gonna know that story. But
Oh, yeah.
anyway, that's how I met Mark. His brother drove the caravan and he helped organize that, and also the bus that went around for the 25th anniversary of the ADA. So
Wow. That's exciting. Exciting stuff happening in Murray, huh?
yeah, they also stopped at Louisville. So our main office got a stop. They stopped at the Braille Museum up there and did a sit-in and a tour as well. So
Oh, okay. Okay,
those
cool.
were the
Now,
only two places in Kentucky they stopped.
oh, wow.
And
Yeah,
one
they
of them,
did.
Murray. I couldn't believe it.
Awesome.
So
Now, what is the Tanya Reeves Act that they were talking
that
about?
act it's basically the way Mark described it and the way the video described it. This individual she basically wants to be in her home. And
Right,
we've
right.
made some movement with Olmsted, but it's not a civil right for individuals with disabilities to have home and community-based care. Yes, some states have some things in place, but it's not a civil right, believe it or not, in 2024. So that's what the Tanya Reeves Act hopes to achieve.
Mhm. And so what we're saying with that is that if it's not a civil right that you can age in your home, then someone else can basically say that you need to be institutionalized, right?
Exactly.
Whether you
Exactly.
want that or not.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
that's a sad, sad thing.
it is a sad thing, and so it is a sad thing, and it is an infuriating thing because you're right; it shouldn't be that way in 2024. But
People should have the right to live where they want to live, despite, we should have those supports in place. But we
yeah,
don't.
we don't. It still takes people organizing and unifying to get these things done, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's what ADAPT is doing. One of the things that Mark also talked about that I really fell in love with, you don't hear me a lot in this interview because I'm just in awe of everything he said. I don't feel like individuals are as passionate in the younger generation as they were in this generation of individuals with disabilities, because they have so much now compared to what individuals had before. And he talks about in his interview about how a lot of individuals think they just assume we're unified as individuals with disabilities. He talks about us being a part of diversity, and yet people don't, you know it's just the group of individuals with disabilities. He says we need to mobilize more. So advocacy doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to go on a demonstration of ADAPT. Do something. If you want to organize around disability arts, do that. If you want to write a book, do that. If find your niche and find other people with that niche and do something, because it's going to take that change to continue to make strides forward, and I'm just scared that people aren't doing that.
That's one of the reasons that we decided to start a podcast is because we were afraid that as the generation who fought for our civil rights ages and maybe becomes less active in the movement, we don't want their stories to be lost. We don't want to forget about their struggles. And I think one thing we have learned the hard way is that if we don't fight for the rights we have, those rights can be taken away.
Absolutely. I mean, look at, how they've tried to plug away at the ADA, saying, oh, mitigating measures, what could that be? That could be glasses. You're not disabled anymore, all of that kind of thing. And people can chip away at what they've done.
Yep. So
scary thought too.
we have to be constantly vigilant. And you're right. We have to be out there. We have to be seen. We have to make sure the community knows that when we talk about people with disabilities, we're talking about people they know, right? Your neighbors.
Yeah, and I know I'm in a rural area. I hear all the time from consumers, I'm just one person. What can I do? And that just makes me so sad because as long as you have a voice or some other way to communicate, use it, do something.
Yeah.
So I'm glad, and we can unify that way. We can mobilize that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Demand and Disrupt will be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, now we are going to hear your and Keith Hosey's interview with Mark Johnson.
Hey, we are here with Mark Johnson, one of the founders of Adapt. He's done several things since then, and we're here to hear about some of his stories and some of the importance of disability and what he's been involved in and what we need to continue to be involved in. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you and your group, for the work they did there in Kentucky around the caravan. But also, I think fondly of Mary Johnson, who did the Ragged Edge and the This Way Rag. And when I think Louisville, I think about more than horses.
Yeah.
And the other city that it stopped in was Pat Puckett. I used to obviously be the executive director of the Georgia Statewide Independent Living Council. So, congratulations on the work y'all did there. And we have an opportunity for you next July.
Awesome. And we're also here with Keith Hosey, the roving reporter. So,
Hey, Mark, it's a real honor to have you here on the podcast. And I'll just take a moment really quickly to plug the Advocato Press, since that is who our sponsor is for this. And Mark was kind enough to just randomly mention the Ragged Edge and Disability Rag, which were published by Advocato Press.
Well, it's interesting because, they did a great Mary and Terry Sue Hartman did a great guide on, about the media. And then Mary actually was the first really public, back then you belonged to an organization and you got a publication and you couldn't wait until the end of the month when you got the publication. Now you just grab your phone. And a lot of organizations struggle with that transition. What made them relevant back then was information. And then all of a sudden, when you go, well, good grief, people can get information different ways now. And right about the time Mary was doing that, Lucy Gwynn was doing The Mouth. Or actually, the magazine initially was called This Brain Has a Mouth, because Lucy had a brain injury and she started taking on the medical industrial complex that, where she got a rehab. And she was afraid that they'd come after her. And then she got so much encouragement and support. Lucy, then, said this brain and mouth called Mouth. What's interesting about that is, I know we're going to talk a little about more about the caravan, but the caravan goes to Amherst, University of Massachusetts next week. And her some of her, main stories will be on display. I mean, they just like with the Ragged Edge or Disability Rag, I'll just say that for now. They're both now been digitized, and so they're not lost. There are a few people like Marsha Katz out there in Montana who literally have every printed copy. So great work back then, because it was like, you sure weren't going to get mainstream press to cover our stuff. And newsletters were good. You didn't have the internet, well, in the context that we do now.
Right.
So yeah, I fond memories of Louisville, including I went to a wedding there and I didn't drink the whiskey, but someone else did.
And you mentioned Louisville. You're no stranger to Louisville. I wanted, and I'm pretty sure some of the big names in Kentucky that disability advocates know. Of course, Arthur Campbell Jr. is still involved in advocacy here in the state. Cass Irvin, involved for a long time. I know that they were involved, and I'm just going to jump into ADAPT because I want to, if that's all right. Yeah. The only ADAPT demonstration that's ever happened in Kentucky prior to this year was actually on Derby Day here in Louisville, and they blocked the buses on the most important day in Louisville. And I know that Arthur was involved. That I'm not so sure. I'm not positive about Cass, but I know that several other adapters had traveled into Louisville to support that, as well as Arthur kind of leading the local troops.
Yeah, I got married, and I met Susan, my wife, in the late 70s in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I grew up, and that's where I was there from like the third grade till the end of college, and then Susan and I started dating. Then she moved to Colorado, and then we stayed in touch and decided to get married in North Carolina. Then I moved to Colorado. So when I went out there, it was 1981, and some of your listeners might remember when Reagan got elected, there was this lawsuit called APTA versus Lewis. Secretary Lewis was the Secretary of Transportation under Reagan, and they won. I mean, the APTA, American Public Transit Association, won, and they're the trade group for all the transit systems around the country. And they won, and therefore the mandates in 504 for lifts on buses went away. And what you had is local option. So each community could decide, without our input, by the way, what was best for us. And so Denver had been getting lifts on buses for what they call their local routes, around the metro area there. But they had what they called express buses. And the express buses are the ones in the suburbs. So if you grabbed an express bus, it was a straight shot downtown. If you got in the local bus, you had to stop at every stop. So it was the difference between a 20-minute ride and an hour and 20 minutes, right? So I got involved, moved out there, went to work for an independent living center that doesn't exist anymore, called HALE, or Holistic Approaches to Independent Living. And at the same time, there was the Atlantis community, which is over 50 years old now. And Wade Blank and some others had started Atlantis. There's some, there's a great, if you haven't seen it or heard it, the Gang of 19 documentary done by Denver Public Library is a great documentary to watch. It gives the history of the Heritage House and Atlantis and the beginnings of ADAPT. And so when I moved out there, the Gang of 19 had already done their stuff in 78. They had already done actions like go around town and mark curbs that needed cuts, and they busted them up with sledgehammers for press conferences and all that kind of stuff. And of course, they didn't immediately go do that stuff. They tried the normal call, attend meetings, write letters stuff. And so we started getting calls around the country about how are you getting lists on express buses? And back to, every new bus has a lift. And we said, every tool in the toolkit, meaning keep doing what you're doing, but you might need to do some more. And we got a grant, and the grant would pay for folks to come to Denver, or we could go to them. And of course, it was not a classroom. The first half a day, well, actually, first day was classroom. It's called the Pitchfork. If you go to ADAPT Virtual Museum, ADAPT has a virtual museum that maintained by Stephanie Thomas out of Austin, Texas. And actually, it's housed at the University of Texas in Arlington, is where the archives are. So we sat around a room, and we went over to the National Council of Independent Living was having a national meeting, one of their first ones, because they were just a new organization of the centers, because it started with like 11 independent living centers back then. And they weren't really interested in that being a membership benefit, which was a little, disheartening. So we went over to the Atlantis, and a guy named Bob Conrad, who's still alive, one of the original Gang of 19, came up with the name American Disabled for Accessible Public Transportation. We'll say that 5 times fast, a media person, and they begin to write down ADAPT, right? And
right.
Then we did the lifts on buses from 83 to 90. We chased, a lot of people, why do you go to San Francisco? Aren't they doing the right thing? We said, it's not about San Francisco doing the right or wrong thing. It's about APTA's meeting there. And it took us to Atlanta and Chicago, and it took us to St. Louis, and it took us, well, actually, we wound up in Canada one time. We did not go to Hawaii. We didn't have enough money to do that. But we chased them. And until, obviously, your listeners will know, July 26th, 1990, ADA was signed a law and said every new bus should have a lift. And the other thing it did that people don't really remember is there was money in the ADA that did a study about the feasibility to put lifts on over-the-road coaches. And we all had to live by the results of the study. And the study was done by DOT and UMTA, or Urban Mass Transit Association. And the results said it's feasible and you don't lose revenue. And so when you get on a Greyhound or a tour bus or a shuttle, if you're running into problems with lifts on buses, then they're not complying with the law. So so that was the beginnings, was of ADAPT. We came up with the name in 83, which makes us, 41 years old. And then we came up the new campaign. So that was called We Will Ride. And a woman named Elaine Kolb up in Connecticut wrote a song called We Will Ride. And then we came up with Free Our People. And then she wrote a song about Free Our People. And then she wrote a song also about Not Dead Yet. And there's some groups that people don't. ADAPT is not an organization. It has no president. It has no executive director. It has people like Arthur, who came in those 80s, sitting in his chair like he doesn't really sit in his chair. I mean, if you describe the audience, you hadn't met Arthur, going, are you going to sit up or lay down or get out? Arthur was one of the best at scooting out of his chair and laying in front of a bus. So he was a burst of energy. I know he got frustrated back then because media wouldn't interview him with his speech, with his CP accent. And it would frustrate him. It frustrated a lot of people. They would interview non-disabled people because they really didn't want to approach disabled people. And then they'd approach the good-looking disabled people. But to get around to someone like Arthur, who still has that board, my brother told me, my younger brother said he still has that board, Mark. And I said, holy crap, and Jody sent me a couple pictures of Arthur. So fond memories. ADAPT is not a perfect organization. We made mistakes. We've pissed people off. Well, sometimes the right people. But what it is Wade had a great quote. Until there's an emotional change, no intellectual persuasion is going to work.
I think that's a phenomenal idea and thought. Wow, what a bunch of history there. I mean, just amazing to have lived through some of that. I know Arthur had said, I think it was either 84 or 87 when they stopped the buses here. And I want to go back to real quick, Mark. You said, then in 1990, the ADA was passed and every new bus was required to have a lift. I doubt that was a coincidence that was in there, thanks to ADAPT.
Well, Knight is a good point. In 1989, we were in Atlanta, and we took over 75 Spring Street, which is the federal building that had Senator Johnny Isaacson's office in it. And we took it over and refused to leave until we had a meeting with DOT in D.C., right? I mean, it's a lot of regional offices in places like state capitals like Atlanta.
Sure.
And so they started dragging people out, and then a series of phone calls were made to Justin Dart and Evan Kemp, who was disabled and EEOC commissioner. He's one of the ones on the stage when ADA was signed. So
yeah,
if you want to know what the experience of feeling vulnerable, or if someone's 15 minutes late and I have an appointment and then I got to start the domino effect. So it was a really, 89, they stopped dragging us out. Bush called and said, Gordon Gray, who was like the attorney general, stop, they have a right to be there. And DOT flew in, and we handed them, Bob Kafka from Texas, handed the language that wound up in the bill about listening on new buses. And we weren't asking for every other, which is what an organization, the Paralyzed Veterans America, thought we were asking for too much and thought every other. The paratransit users were complaining that if you do this, we're going to lose our service. So the disability community on the outside, to the average viewer, thought we were unified. We weren't.
Right.
We were not unified, and we're still not. We're the most unified we've ever been, but then ADAPT started shifting its emphasis to getting the institutional bias removed from the long-term services support system, or home and community-based service. And that campaign kicked off in 1990 in Atlanta. There's a great movie to watch. It's called When You Remember Me. Fred Savage of Wonder Years plays a real live person with muscular dystrophy that was in the Heritage House where Wade was hired. Kevin Spacey, of all people, played Wade. So Wade Blank was Wade Black in the movie. Now, I used to promote that movie until Stacey got a little bit in trouble. And then, but it's a movie. It was an ABC special, When You Remember Me. And we got to premiere it at the Action in 1990 in Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
And part of the reason we went to Atlanta was Louis Sullivan, Secretary Louis Sullivan, was the head of, I think they called it HEW back then, Health, Education, Welfare. And he was a graduate of Morehouse College. Plus, getting rid of the institutional bias, which is about a civil right to community living, which we still don't have. I mean, once we get the LaTanya Reid Freedom Act passed, we'll actually have a civil right. But ADA is a civil rights bill. Olmstead, 9 years later, moved the needle some. But go call your state and ask for their own stamp plan. I bet they don't have one.
Our state may have one. We've been in the news a couple times about our lack of access for individuals with disabilities, and that's something we're here in Kentucky, just starting a new ADAPT chapter And so some of that is why we decided we needed to adapt. And you said, I think your quote of Wade says it best is, I think you said Wade said it.
Yeah.
We need to have every tool in the tool belt.
Yeah, every tool in the toolkit, and until there's an emotional change, no intellectual persuasion works. And it means when I could take a legislator down to the street corner and he or she could get on and I couldn't, we said, does that make sense? It's called public transit. Does that make sense? You know, and then when you get in front of a bus and someone's going to be late to work, rightfully so, they're pissed. But then when they settle down and go, oh, so you don't even get to go to work because there's no way for you to get there.
Right.
Then you go, all right, so your half an hour, couple hour delay is a life learning opportunity if you choose to do that. Now, granted, you know, Keith, there were issues with the early generation lifts. Now you find ramps and lower rate kneelers. There were issues with unions, right? There were issues with time windows. How long does it take to load somebody? Does that delay their bathroom break a couple hours from them because the scheduling was so rigid for drivers? If they had a bathroom break scheduled at a certain time and the lift malfunctioned, then it caused a domino. So not naive enough to think that, you know, that solved the problem. What that did was made, you know, riding public transit a civil right. And when you have a demand for a certain type of equipment, it's supplied. And that's why we're going to see airlines where Arthur, myself, others will not have to get out of their chair to fly anymore. We're very close to that happening. Kelly Buckland, who was the head of National Council of Independent Living, works for Mayor Pete. I still call him the Secretary of Transportation. And regulatory wise, they've already written it down that renovating an existing plane. So Delta Airlines has already come out with a prototype.
I was reading those articles. I'm super excited about that.
And it's already published for public comment, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's for the listeners that don't know the process in changing federal regulations or state regulations. Once we're at a point where they're asking for public input, it's pretty close to the end life of that decision and moving forward with the change. So that is very exciting for individuals who fly. I think you still in 2024 get these misconceptions that, oh, you know what? I don't think people who use wheelchairs fly, do they? And I know many professionals who use wheelchairs and travel for work, as well as many friends who, a friend of mine is flying down. He is driving to Key West this weekend because he wants to have his power chair and doesn't want the airline to do something accidental. So instead, he's going to drive 21 hours.
Wow. And I get that. I quit flying. I flew for a while by myself, and then I started flying with somebody. And then I quit flying. I lived in Atlanta. You know, when we got married in 81, our daughter Lindsay was born in 84, and then we moved to Atlanta to be closer to family, and that's when I went to work in 87 for the Shepherd Center, rehab hospital for people with brain and spinal injuries. And, the Air Carriers Access Act, there used to be one, and they charged people like us $50 more to fly because, they needed to help us, and our chairs took up more cargo space. So on the surface, you go, well, yeah, they need to do more for you. And you go, wait a minute, that's a cost of doing business that needs to be spread across all customers. So the air carriers access, a huge thing in our communities, we don't believe in ourselves sometimes. We can sit around and talk about what, every new house when topography allows could have a no-step entrance, if we believe it. And Eleanor Smith started Concrete Change, ended up being a retired school teacher, ran that out of her house in Atlanta. She's 80 years old now and did that for 25 years. And so she called it visibility, get in the house, get around, get in the bathroom. Lever handles are now more mainstream. Rocker switches for the lights are more mainstream. They used to be custom items. And so, you want to call it universal design, which is Ron Mace term he gave it, disabled guy architect out of Raleigh, North Carolina. They actually have Center for Universal Design named after Ron Mace. And then you can call it visibility, whatever. The aging community, which now I'm part of because I'm 73, calls it aging in place.
Right.
But it's the same thing as it's a right. But it makes sense. Curb cuts help more than just wheelchair users.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Thank you for mentioning Concrete Change. I actually, myself and one other coworker went to Atlanta in the early 2000s and were trained in the visitability concept.
Wow.
And one of our coworkers, well, not my coworker anymore, one of Carissa's coworkers, David Allgood, always explained it. He's the Center for Accessible Living's advocate, and he always explains it as, hey, you know what? I want to be able to come over, stop by for the football game,
right?
Have a beer,
right?
Use the bathroom if I need to,
right?
And leave.
Right. Well, like
it doesn't get much more fundamental than that.
Mm-hmm.
Or Chris would say, when I used to go talk to home builders or potential home buyers and go, how many of you like to live in a house that you could resell to anybody? Anybody could visit. If something happened to you, like it did me 53 years ago, right? You wouldn't have to spend a lot of money renovating, and you could age in place. And all hands would go up and say, well, Mark Johnson running around saying, make all houses his way is not the path to change. What the path to change is, if you answer those 4 questions in the affirmative, when you go to that custom home to see what you want your home to be, you go, well, I'm not interested in your house because I can't get through the bathroom door. And the builder set up the food chain and they go, well, maybe we need to widen the bathroom door, right? In all our houses. Don't make it a spec home that requires a custom change. Make it a standard that you do in all homes.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a great concept. I wanted to talk to you because you mentioned the point a little bit about, we're not all united. I know I hear a lot in my rural area neck of the woods, I'm just one person. What can I do? We're not going to make any change here. That happens in the bigger cities. What would you say to that?
Well, if you enjoy being powerless, then go have your pity party. When I'd say, I'm nice about it, I go, I don't blame you for being pissed off that such and such not done. Like in the earlier years before ADA, the Y would have a swimming day on Wednesdays at 2:00, bring your own help to get you in and out of the pool, right? Versus, well, when does everybody else swim? Right? Well, all day long. So you go, people are calling and saying, are you a registered voter? Because I know you wanted to touch on voting. Are you a registered voter? No. What does that have to do with it? I said, well, then do you know your elected official? No. And I said, well, guess what? He or she doesn't know you. They don't know your issue. Nothing gets done. it's not a hard connection to make, meaning some legislatures meet every other year, but they may go to your local church. They may own the grocery store. They may be the banker. And real change, sustainable change. I don't mean episodic change, which we have a history of. Real change occurs when that relationship occurs, and that there's Mark. How's it going, Mark? And hey, Mark, what about that inclusive part we just did with the for the park and rec? Or hey, Mark, the beach matting, or hey, Mark, the pontoon ride to go look at the dolphins, or so the young generation, which is cool, the little 19 to 35-year-olds who were, born around after ADA passed, basically, have a high standard, which is good. But understand the history, understand some of the tactics. And you can't just write about it on Facebook. You actually, because you're sometimes preaching to the choir.
Right.
And it's important to take your message to the broader audience. And that's what the Spirit ADA Torch Relay was in 2000. That's what the ADA bus tour was 2015. That's what the Caravan, which only has a couple more weeks on the road. It's in Providence, Rhode Island today, and Hyannis, Massachusetts on Thursday, and then Boston on Saturday. It's the 50th anniversary of the Boston Center for Independence. That's what it's about, is get out of your silo. Let's come together, because we're stronger together. And let's figure out who we want the next president to be. And let's figure out what we want her to do. A biased, unsolicited comment, right? But Kamala Harris, as a senator, supported the Disability Integration Act, which means she supports the LaTanya Reese Freedom Act. The vice president candidate has Gus. His son is on the spectrum. I mean, folks.
I read that, yeah.
Yep. All valuable stuff to know. But back to the voting, it's register, know your rights as a voter. But main thing is it's all right. Anybody, nonprofit or whatever, can call and say, do you have anybody that works on these issues? We'd like to sit down with them and hear what the candidate's position on that. That's totally legal. Legal, not illegal. Legal to do surveys and publish the results. And so I think the Caravan, you have my personal history, spinal cord injury, get married and all that stuff, and you have adapt, something that I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right people, and then groups that have sprung out of that. And now you got groups like rampd.org, which is artists, disabled artists coming. You got fwd.doc.org or fwd.doc.org, which is disabled people in front and behind the camera. Jim Lebrecht that did help do Crip Camp. All that stuff. You're seeing new models, and centers need to pay attention. They need to pay attention, because if they don't, they're going to be less relevant than they already are.
I want to just really quickly go back, Mark. You mentioned we talked a lot here about adapt and the ADA, and a little bit about independent living, and a lot of that is focused on needs. A lot of it is focused on transportation, housing, in such a way that sometimes I think those that are not disabled, lose sight that we are, as disabled individuals, humans as well, and we have humanity. And I love that you brought up, now you have these groups. You have performing arts. You have DPAN, Deaf Performing Arts Network. You have visual artists. You have dancers now with visible disabilities. Not only is the Paralympics so much more prevalent in the U.S. now, but we have Olympians who are coming out, so to speak, with their disability,
Right.
and are comfortable enough to do that. So I think, I think too, when we talk about the future of disability and advocacy, it's important, as you said, as much as it is important for the legislator to know me, Keith, who lives in her district. It's also important for us to have those events. The Center for Accessible Living in Louisville for many years had a juried art show, which oftentimes we had to fundraise for because so-called, funding agencies were worried about numbers of people that had hours of personal care, which is extremely important for our community. But why wouldn't art be important for our community as well? Why can't we express ourselves in a way, that we're able to? So
three or four areas you hit on it. To me, you don't prioritize, you mobilize. So if you got people that want to talk about language, which has evolved, if you got people that want to talk about the lack of coverage, journalists, if you got, there didn't used to be disability student service offices at universities, and they clearly weren't disability studies programs, and all that kind of stuff's in place now. And some of those study programs need to be paying people like y'all to come tell your personal story and engage these students who are 18, 19, 20. We don't do this stuff free. I mean, our life experience has given us something that's worth something. And our books are good. Our poems are good. Laura Hershey's You Get Proud by Practicing, or Johnny Crescendo's music out of Pennsylvania, Tear Down the Walls. This stuff is all, the world is on fire right now. Whether it's Ukraine or Sudan or Gaza, but I'm a Christian, and my faith kind of just said there's a plan, and I just got to do my part. And if I do my part, and everybody else does their part, then you don't get caught up in egos. I mean, we all like to be thanked. We all like to be front and center. We like to get credit. But we have not been together, Carissa, in 34 years. We have not we unified some around the ADA Amendments Act, and the ABLE Act, which is the accounts you can set up for people with developmental intellectual disabilities. That ABLE Act really wasn't about us; it was about some of us.
Right.
So we have an opportunity in 2025 to. There will be a disability-led march across the Pettus Bridge next July 26th on the 35th anniversary of ADA. And wow. It wasn't even the Caravan team's idea. It was the National Park Service. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the march from Montgomery to Selma. And 60th anniversary of Medicaid, 60th anniversary of Medicare. 50th anniversary of IDEA. And I tend to be one of those who says, anniversaries, you can have a birthday cake and sing happy, whatever. And that's okay. But the main thing you're doing is saying, it gives an opportunity to come together and reflect and plan, strategize and organize. And foundations now are finding us and are beginning to give us more money because we're about more than just direct service. We're about social change. And that's attractive to a foundation or a philanthropist. Not that direct services aren't necessary, they're critical. But you get more direct services by sometimes the social change.
I really don't think they teach this. They don't teach young people this. We don't get a period on disability history. I didn't even know about it till college. So I wish, you said that we are a minority. We are a group.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't see us that way.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to change.
Well, Carissa, you brought up the fact, this individual says, I'm not, what difference can one person make? And you say, there are people with your story, and they'll quickly find out how many others have the story, and you'll quickly come together and want to do something about it. There's 60 plus million. If you look at the census data, it's like 1 in 4 or whatever. And then we all have 1 or 2 family members. And so in some ways, we use the minority mindset to get our rights. And now the mindset is disability justice. And disability justice means when we accomplish true justice, everybody benefits. When you talk about poverty, you talk about housing, education, the school to prison pipeline. You talk about LGBTQ plus. You talk about, and so then that I think what you were kind of implying was we are represented in all those other minorities, and together we're the community. I mean, and I think Keith hit on it was the identity. You resisted being called disabled, and you said it's all right. People are now going from people first to identity first language. Folks, I'm not hiding my spinal cord injury when I come rolling in your room in a power chair. Right? I'm not differently able. Right. Unless you want to call yourself that too. And then that's just too cute for me. And the word special needs to go away. Yeah. Every kid needs an IEP or individualized education plan. Customized learning needs to be the standard.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I think educators would agree with you, the people doing the actual work, because they're doing it anyway, even when they don't realize when they're doing, right. You talk to someone and they say, well, I don't know if I can teach, not now, hopefully, but 30, 40, 50 years ago. I don't know if I can teach that individual, with a disability. But when you talk to educators, they talk about all the different learning styles that children have, or even the adults have different learning styles than children do.
Right.
But some people can't connect those dots that, everyone has their own kind of learning style. So we probably need to make it accessible to everyone. Right. And that's, that's that kind of the end deal for all of this is I'm not fighting for Keith to have access to anywhere. Mm-hmm. I'm fighting for everyone in my community to have access to everywhere.
Right. That sounds like a good rap.
I won't quit my day job for sure.
Please don't. Well, again, I could sit here and listen to you all day, because I feel like I've learned more in 1 hour than I have in 20 years of disability advocacy, almost. So thank you for giving us just a little bit of your time.
If you like the podcast, remember to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you really like the podcast, we'd love it if you could leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. That helps more people to find us. If you really, really like the podcast, then please tell someone about it, either in person or send them an email or just share the link on social media. Thank you all. Every bit helps, and it makes a huge difference for us. If you'd like a transcript, please send us an email to demandanddisrupt@gmail.com and put transcript in the subject line. Thanks to Chris Unkin for our theme music. Demand and Disrupt is a publication of the Advocato Press with generous support from the Center for Accessible Living located in Louisville, Kentucky. And you can find links to buy the book, A Celebration of Family, Stories of Parents with Disabilities, in our show notes. Thanks, everyone.
You say you've seen a change in me. Just for once I think I would agree. We both know there's a difference. will be, will be. Disregard for good to set us free. There's just no way of knowing if love lives anymore. Turn out the light, then close the door. We tried to make things better, repair and rearrange things, but each and every letter spells out